Hey, it's Steph here from Moving to Canada, and today I'm talking Canadian citizenship, specifically a bill that recently passed Parliament and received Royal Assent, and it's going to change how citizenship by descent works in Canada once it comes into effect. If you follow the news, you may have seen articles covering lost Canadians over the past few years, so if you have, this is the latest in that saga. But if this is news to you, we'll dig through a little bit of history first. Very briefly, in around December 2023, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice ruled that the first generation limit on citizenship by descent in Canada was unconstitutional. It's a lot of legalese. So what was that limit? Well, since 2009, there was a law change that said one generation born outside of Canada could automatically inherit citizenship. That's the first generation abroad. So that was the law, but what did that actually mean in practice? Forbes just published an article noting that it's likely to impact over 500,000 Canadians living in the US alone. And estimates from the Canadian government suggest that there's probably about 115,000 lost Canadians today who will now qualify for citizenship under the newly changed laws. So it's going to affect a lot of people today, and then a lot of people who are Canadian and live outside of Canada going into the future. So who are these people? Who are they? What do they look like? The court case helpfully gave us 7 examples, and we'll outline 2 of those here today to show you the real practical impacts. One example was Gregory. Gregory was born in the US. He had a Canadian mother and an American father. He grew up in Canada from age 7 before later moving to Asia as an adult. Today, he lives in Hong Kong with his Russian-born wife, and they have a child. But their child, who was born in Hong Kong, is not automatically a Canadian citizen under the 2009 rules. Because Gregory was born outside of Canada and his child was born outside of Canada, his child, under the 2009 rules, was not deemed a Canadian citizen to start, even though Gregory essentially grew up in Canada. There's also Tim. Now, Tim was born in Fiji to a Canadian father and a British mother. His parents were working abroad. He spent his childhood in the UK and Canada. He did his post-secondary studies in Canada, and then he moved to the US for post-grad studies at MIT and then to work at NASA. In 2018, he married an American citizen, and their child, who was born in the US in 2020, was denied Canadian citizenship because of that second generation cutoff. Yeah, Tim was born outside of Canada. His child, also born outside of Canada, not deemed Canadian despite Tim growing up there in Canada, that is. The argument in the courts, and also by a lot of people who saw this as quite unfair, is that it created 2 classes of Canadians. There was the class who was born in Canada or naturalized, and those whose citizenship by descent options were more fragile. The court found that difference violated charter protections, and then from there, the government didn't appeal that decision, and the court gave Parliament time to fix the problem. So if you think back to a few minutes ago, I said this was all kicking off in court in 2023. Throughout 2024 and then all of this year, there has been quite a lot of debate at the parliamentary level about what this new bill should look like. The courts, as I understand it, have not been super happy about how long it's taken. They've been given multiple deadline extensions, and here we are today. The new bill that has been approved, but again is not yet the law, introduces these core changes. The first is it removes the first generation limit, the limit that I was talking about where a Canadian born abroad passing citizenship only to one generation, that no longer exists as the test. The second thing it does is it grants citizenship retroactively to those who are excluded by the old rules. Often when a law comes into effect, it comes into effect that day and impacts people going forward. This one, since it's retroactively applicable, means that it applies to people who were impacted in the past. So people who are lost Canadians haven't been precluded from accessing this new change just because, they were born before today or whenever it is that the law comes into effect. And the third thing it does is establishes a new framework for the future. People now don't just automatically pass on citizenship forever, despite where they're born and where their children are born. What it requires is that if there is a Canadian born abroad and they also have their child abroad, the parent must show a substantial connection to Canada. So the substantial connection test looks a lot like the citizenship test. the parents, that is, must have spent at least 1,095 days, or roughly 3 years, physically in Canada before the child's birth or adoption. That's the heart of the new law. It's a little bit of legalese, but we'll talk like practical steps and what that means for today's newcomers and why it might matter to you. So if you're a newcomer to Canada, you're thinking about becoming a citizen eventually, this law gives you and your family a little bit more stability in the future, because you now have a framework for what passing on your citizenship means, especially if you become a citizen and then leave Canada and have a child. Your citizenship won't just be for you. It can genuinely be passed on to your children, even if they're born abroad. And if your children want children, so that's your grandchildren, to be Canadian, that's possible too. But your whole family will need to understand who has lived in Canada and when, because there is a very real requirement that the parent who was born abroad needs to have spent enough time in Canada to then pass the citizenship on automatically. At the same time, it reinforces the idea that your descendants should maintain a real life, not just a paper tie to Canada, if they want to maintain that citizenship. It also increases document keeping requirements for people today and into the future. So if you think that there's any chance you'll fall into this boat, a proof of a Canadian presence is going to be quite important for your family. It might matter a great deal for your children's children, whether you've kept records about taxes, schooling, leases or home ownership, that kind of thing. It could be a good idea to just update your record keeping practices if you think you might fall into this boat, or your children rather, if they're born abroad, because there is potential that one day they will need to prove to the Canadian government that they've spent a significant amount of time in Canada, or a substantial connection test. All right, that's it from me on the Lost Canadians Bill. I hope it was clear. It's possible that citizenship and passing it on through generations isn't the biggest item on your checklist, but it doesn't hurt either. So I hope that helps. If you want to receive information like this, helpful immigration updates, or even anything about finances, living, settling in Canada, we keep our community up to date with emails multiple times a week covering everything from the latest in immigration, express entry draws, and finances and settling. So I would love to see you there if you aren't already. Just head to the Moving to Canada homepage and throw your email in that box to join our community. We have over 170,000 people there already, so you'll be in great company. And the website, in case you don't know it, is movingto Canada.com, and you will see the box right away on the homepage. Thanks for bearing with me, and I'll see you next time.